Good morning, gentlemen, and welcome to your first whole school assembly for this half term. When you returned to school back in September, after a very long period of lockdown, those of you who were here last year came back to a school where things were really quite different from what you had been used to before lockdown. For example, you found yourself in a new tutor group that is made up of only boys in the same year group as you. You came back to a strict one-way system, separate entrances to the school, and new routines for hygiene and wearing masks. You have all shown, and that includes those of you who joined us for the first time this year in Year 7, that you understand the importance of these new routines, and you have followed them all exceptionally well. This has been very important, and your mature, sensible attitude is a real credit to you, to your families, and to the school staff. Well done. So let's take the opportunity of a fresh start following the half-term holiday to remind ourselves about why these routines are so important. Back in February, March of this year, we all started to hear about a new coronavirus called COVID-19. Nobody really knows what first caused the spread of this virus, but the likelihood is that it is a virus that used to circulate among some groups of animals, and somehow it found its way into the human population. This happens from time to time. You may have heard of SARS or bird flu, which became prevalent a few years ago in similar fashion. When new viruses are transmitted to humans in this way, they are very dangerous because our body's immune system doesn't recognise the virus and it has no defence against it. COVID-19 is especially dangerous because it transmits from one person to another much more easily than earlier viruses such as SARS and bird flu. This is not new to the world. It is only 100 years ago, for example, that flu, which we are all now very used to, was just as dangerous as COVID-19, and millions of vulnerable people across the world died from flu. But now we have vaccines, flu jabs, to protect ourselves against it if we are vulnerable, and so flu is not nearly so dangerous as it used to be. And in response to COVID, brilliant scientists across the world are very quickly developing vaccines that will keep us safe from this new virus. They are making great progress very quickly, and the expectation is that by early next year, a vaccine to protect us from COVID will be available, and we can start dealing with it in the same way as we deal with flu. However, it is going to be some time yet before we reach that stage. And even when we do have a vaccine that everybody has been able to benefit from, it is still very unlikely that we will ever be able to return to all the arrangements that we had before COVID. Humanity has learned that we need to be much more careful about staying safe from infection and pandemics, and many of the safeguards that we have put in place will have to remain and become our new way of operating in schools and other public spaces. Now, another reason that COVID is so dangerous is because if a person is in a vulnerable category, COVID-19 can make them extremely ill, and in some cases, as you know, it can lead to death. Older people and people with pre-existing health conditions are especially vulnerable, and the statistics show that vulnerable people from many specific Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities are even more at risk. And this means that for most of us who are young, fit and healthy, COVID-19 is not very dangerous. But for many people in our families and in our communities, it is exceptionally dangerous. And if we're not careful, those of us who are fit and healthy can pass the virus on to much more vulnerable people. This is why it is so important that we take our hands, face, space routines very seriously, and why it is such a credit to you that you did that so well last half term. This is how we limit the spread of the virus and keep vulnerable people safe. Now, if you follow the news, you will know that because of last summer's lockdown, the number of people catching COVID-19 and becoming seriously ill from it came right down. And because of that, schools and shops and the rest of society opened up again. But if you follow the news, you will also know that because of society opening up again, inevitably the rate of infection and the number of people becoming seriously ill is starting to increase again, very rapidly. You probably heard over the weekend that many shops and other businesses will almost certainly have to lock down again later this week because of this. Now, there are no plans for schools to lock down again because everybody realises how important it is for children and young people to be able to continue with their education. However, this does mean that in schools we now have an even greater responsibility to behave in ways that keeps the rest of society safe. Even more than before half term, we all need to make sure that we follow the hands, face, space routines to keep our families and our communities safe. So, this is what I am asking you all to do from this morning. Keep following all the routines that we put in place in September, including following the one-way system, wearing your masks in the corridors and public spaces, sanitising your hands regularly, not leaving the classroom during lesson times, using separate entrances, staying in your year group areas at break and lunchtime, avoiding large gatherings, and helping your teachers clean classroom surfaces at the end of each lesson. There are some of these things that we now need to do even better than we did last half term. And I'm going to list those things now. The first is this: come to school every day with a reusable face mask. Not a single-use face mask, and wash your reusable face mask regularly. Increasingly, the scientific evidence is showing that a clean face mask is much more effective than one that has not been washed. Remember too that the face mask is not there to protect the person wearing it, but to protect others. This means that it is very important to wear the mask properly, covering mouth and nose, so that we are not a risk to other people, to our families, or to our communities. Secondly, we need to get much better at social distancing. It is almost impossible to pass the virus from one person to another over a distance of 2 meters or more. It is also much harder for the virus to transmit from one person to another if the two people are not facing each other. Now, it is very difficult to keep a 2 meter distance from each other in the corridors between lessons, and that is why we must wear masks in the corridors and why we must follow the one-way system. By following the one-way system, as long as we do it properly, we can avoid face-to-face contact as much as possible and keep our families safe. This also means, of course, that we need to avoid bunching in the corridor and walking in a group. Just walk sensibly, calmly, purposefully, and as much as possible by yourself to your next lesson or to your exit. Now, thirdly, it is no good following all of these routines if we then go outside and start mixing in large groups and forgetting social distancing. We are putting our families and our communities at risk if we do this. We must be sensible outside at lunchtime and at break time and on our way to school in the morning and on our way home at the end of the day, and we must be careful to maintain social distance. Likewise, when you line up to come into school in the morning, The reason for lining up is to minimise face-to-face contact. So keep in single file as much as possible. And younger students, do the same when you're lining up to come in at the end of break or lunch. To help with social distancing at break time and at lunchtime, we have introduced the rule of 6, like the rest of society. And it's very important, gentlemen, that when staff instruct you to move away from a large group, a group that is larger than 6, you do so sensibly and cooperatively. This is to keep you, your families, your communities and each other safe. So to recap, keep doing all those things that you were doing so well before half term. And now add to those things washing your reusable face mask regularly and maintaining a proper social distance when you are outside of the classroom. Remember the rule of 6. When we do these things, we will continue to keep our older relatives, our more vulnerable members of our families, and our communities and each other safe. Thank you for listening.